Sahana vavatu, Sahanau bhunaktu, Sahaviryang karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Let's revise value 10. Value 10 was viraga or vairagyam. This means dispassion through having a sense of objectivity or seeing things for what they are, seeing things as they deserve to be seen instead of how we are seeing them through our own filters. And this involves taking time to look at the intrinsic value of anything around us. So anything that we are perhaps excessively attached to or connected to, then we just take a moment and we say, what is the true value of this object, this person, this experience, this skill, this talent? What can it really do for me and what can it not do for me? And then after we ask this question and get clear on its value that it can provide, then we can thereby engage with it more maturely, more clearly, instead of engaging with it according to our notions of what it can do for us. So therefore, we're simply aligning ourselves back to reality by first seeing and reevaluating our relationships with objects that we happen to be interfacing with. Otherwise, we get too involved. It's not like we get totally uninvolved. It's just that sometimes we get too involved, right? With a person or with the object or with anything. We lose perspective about what it's really like. Why am I here? Like, where is this all going? So thereby, we always ask this question: what is the intrinsic value of this object? And what does this do? It helps us to discern a few things about the world. For example, we get to see that nothing's absolute here. Is anything absolute? Nothing's absolute. Only the self alone is absolute. Everything else comes at a cost. For example, to gain X, we compromise on Y. For example, to learn something new right now, suppose you want to learn something new, then you have to compromise on your time, right? Your time, energy, and effort. That means we have to receive from something else. Let's take Tiger Woods, for example. He's brilliant at golf, yeah? Do you know his story? Golf from like 9 or something, nothing but golf. That's it. The whole life is just golf. So what does this mean? Even though one is good at one skill, what's the cost of that? They compromise on so many other skills, so many other things. So in that same way, if we start to get over attached, over clingy onto one particular object, then what follows after that? We start to lose perspective of everything else. Therefore, we miss out. And then later on, we say, why was I so attached to this in the first place? Right? It wasn't that big deal. So therefore, we always keep that in perspective no matter what. We also understand that every experience or object is subject to 4 variables. And that means these 4 variables need to come in the right place at the right time for us to actually have a relationship with anything. And when we discern that these 4 variables actually are hardly ever attained, then you see the real point of what is the point of really clinging onto objects ongoingly. And what's the first factor? What's the first fact? It's you. You, the desirer, constantly changes, right? The more we know about life, the more our value towards those things in the past changes. Therefore, our relationship to those things which we spend years and years attaching to changes because you change. We can't help it. The more we know about life, the more we're in touch with life, the more our relationship with those close ones also changes. It's just a byproduct of change. The second is the desired object also changes. So it too goes through its own phases, its own evolution, because we know that in life, everything changes. That is just the rule. So you change. The object changes. It also has to be the right time and the place. If the right time and place is not there, suppose we all go on a picnic and then suddenly clouds and rain starts to fall, right? So what happens? Now our initial attachment to having a picnic and being so excited about it now gets compromised. So if we were over attached to having a picnic, and the clouds come, then our own joy is compromised. Therefore, this is another factor that is always there waiting to compromise one's capacity to enjoy. The last factor that compromises capacity to enjoy is our own mood changes. Suppose that you say, I want to break from all these lockdowns, so I'm going to go to an island and just chill out there. But then we turn on the news and then you see there's some trouble back home in your hometown. Then what happens? Even though you're in a safe place physically, mentally, we're still not consistent with our physical place. Therefore, even that compromises our experience to or capacity to enjoy. So there's these four factors that are constantly going on. So now you, in the light of these four factors, evaluate what is the true worth of getting over attached or over clinging onto anything in this world, considering it is subject to these four factors. So again, what is vairagya or what is viraga? To summarize, it is simply taking the coloring out of our relationship to things. So what do I mean by that? Suppose, just imagine right now, you're looking through eyes of colors, right? And everything's rainbowish, right? Everything looks incredible. So what is viraga? It's not like kind of taking, life out of life itself. It's taking those personal colorings that we have generated through the course of time out of objects, out of people, out of experiences. Therefore, what is revealed? It's true colors. So all we're doing is taking personal colors out so that we may see the true colors of things as they intrinsically really are. Also, viraga is not about social or physical distancing. We've already established this last week. Also in the, I don't know if you know about the Course in Miracles. It's a Christian-based non-dual course. And I think it's incredible. It's got a lot of similarities to Advaita Vedanta. But in the 365-day workbook, I went through it 2 times. I think it was lesson 1 or 2. The lesson 1 or 2 says, I have given everything in this room, in this place, in this hall, all of the meaning that it has for me. Think about this. I, the subject, have given in this room, in this house, in this world, all of the meaning that it has for me. What is this saying? I have given it all of the color that it has for me. And therefore, this course very rightly says, first, before doing anything, this is lesson 1, remembering Course in Miracles, take out the coloring before looking at or appreciating the objective world, which we call Ishvara's grand order. Because how can you appreciate Ishvara's grand order if we're still looking through the eyes of our own coloring, seeing it as we wish it to be instead of what it actually is in its true light? Everything in this world, in this house, in this family, everywhere, all of the meaning I have given it. None other than my own coloring have made it to be what it is. Therefore, step 1, take out the coloring before one has the capacity to grasp the fullness of this objective world, which is created by and sustained by and destroyed by Ishvara's grand order. Because one cannot arrive to the final vision, that is, they cannot hold the final vision if their subjective mind keeps on inserting superimpositions of its own colorings onto the objective world. Because the only way to ascertain the final truth, since the truth cannot be objectified, the only way to know the final truth is how? Through the world, recognizing that this very world is the final truth. Because we said over and over again, Ishvara alone is. God alone is. There's only God here. Now, how can I recognize God? How can I be at one with God if my own mind still keeps on coloring this world with Andre's own notions, with Robert's own notions? Therefore, step 1, first, look into this mind, thought by thought. What is it coloring in? What is it projecting? What is it trying to create out of its own notions, out of its own imaginations? Look into that, take that out, and then therefore realign the vision back onto what the scriptures are saying. Therefore, step 1, address the subjective notions. Only then I can appreciate the objective world, which we call Vyavaharika world. Only then one can hold the permanent truth of oneself. That is the order that Vedanta provides. So that's very clear there. But in spirituality, what do we do when we're young? We go straight onto the highest vision. We go to Ramana Maharishi, right? The book, I am that, Sagradatta's book. And then we try to ascertain that knowledge. But the reader who's reading that, what is he doing? What is she doing? Dumping notions after notions onto these teachings, notion after notion, not willing to look at oneself's own notions, which are compromising the very teachings that are trying to say or not say, first, take care of your mind, and then you can appreciate the subjective world, and then you can understand what I'm trying to show you. Value 11 was anahankaraha. This was the healthy I sense. Value 12 was anudarshanam. This is reflecting on the fivefold limitations. What is this about? This is understanding the rarity, acknowledging the rarity of human birth. It is rare to receive a human birth. It is even rarer to find in your lifetime a teacher of the scriptures. It is even rarer than that, because a lot of us find a teacher, right? Even rarer than that to actually assimilate the teachings that are being expounded to us. Rare to be a human, rare to find a teacher, even rarer to assimilate the final teachings. In fact, these are the three blessings, the highest blessings that one can receive in the entire universe. To be a human being that has the capacity to understand the final reality. 2, to find a teacher who's expounding the vision of the final reality. And 3, for that very mind that's listening under the guidance of the teacher to actually assimilate firmly the final reality. You cannot be more blessed than to receive these 3 blessings in the consecutive order. So what does this now imply? Having received the human birth, live life deliberately, mindfully, right? Don't throw it away. Don't waste it away. How? Well, I'll give you some ideas. Suppose you wake up tomorrow. We can ask a simple question. How can I make the best of today? Here I am, one more opportunity. How can I make the best of today? What will I commit to today? Just scan through your mind a few things. What will I commit to today? What will I spend some time on today? What have I been missing out that this relative person, we don't have to now philosophize who's the relative, who's the absolute, just this relative person. We have to also address them, right? What does this relative person want to get involved with today? What have they been missing out? What have they been denied for some time? Address the relative person also. See, spirituality is not about avoiding anything. It's simply embracing and knowing where things belong, putting things in the right place. It's not about dismissing the person and then bringing the absolute self. There's no need to bring in anything. We can also say, if I were to die tomorrow, would I die complete? Suppose tomorrow, all of us have a plan to, not a plan, but we're given death tomorrow. Could we say right now, I have achieved all there is to achieve in this life? It's unfortunate, maybe, we all say, I want to live a few more years, but it's unfortunate. But nevertheless, despite saying all of that, I still feel I can die complete. I've attained all there is to attain in this life. Can you honestly say that to yourself? Is there something that I wish I've done more of or less of? We can also ask that. This helps us to see if we're really living or taking advantage of this rarity blessing called human birth. We can also ask what personal needs right now are not being fulfilled for this relative person. Right, what is being denied, as I said earlier? What personal needs do you, the relative person, have that have been put aside in the name of spirituality, in the name of busy, in the name of work, in the name of whatever it is, right? What needs have we been putting aside that need to be looked into? See, spirituality is about embracing, loving the relative person, because the relative person is, as I said last time, Ishvara. So there's no question of denying anything here. It's just about living full life while not losing perspective or the difference between the relative person and the absolute self. We can also adopt a karma yoga attitude of life. Karma yoga just means spiritualizing your entire life. The entire life becomes devotional, focused, God-oriented life. That means we're not changing any actions. We're not now saying, go and change your life. This is not karma yoga. Karma yoga is simply continuing whatever you're doing right now, but just in the name of reminding yourself this is all Ishvara's grand order. That means using everything that happens to remind yourself of the presence of God in this world, in and through everything. That's what karma yoga is. It's an attitude change. We can also incorporate a few prayers into our life. We got the Vedic prayer of, as we just chanted, Mahamrityu Jara mantra.
Om Tyambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardhanam urvarukamiva bandhanan mrityormukshijamamritaat.
Trayambakam yajamahe. So, in other words, you are the three-eyed one. You, Ishvara, are the three-eyed one who has knowledge, to whom we propitiate. Now, who is this three-eyed one? What does the three-eyed one mean? It is Ishvara that is neither manifest nor unmanifest, but the one who witnesses both, or in whose presence the manifest and the unmanifest is. So we thus propitiate to you, God. Propitiate, that means we devote to you. And then it's got Sugandhim. In other words, you, Ishvara, who are the destroyer of the universe, who brings fragrance to life, to our life. Fragrance means experiences. Because you bring fragrance to life, because of your destructive power, it opens opportunity for new, fresh moments. Because how else can you receive fragrance in life unless the old moment has been giving way for the new, fresh moment? Therefore, the fragrance represents the new, fresh moment. Why? Because you are that one who destroys the old to give way to the new. And then it's got Pushti Vardhanam. In other words, if you and I make use of the opportunities which Shiva brings, in this case, the you that I've been talking about is Shiva. In this case, Ishvara's name is Shiva. If we make use of the opportunities that Shiva brings, then we are nourished by those opportunities. That means by the fragrance, by the new moment that is being brought to us every day. And then we can ask the question, what do we, the limited individuals, want from you, Ishvara or Shiva? And then in Sanskrit, Urvarukam iva bandhanat. Now, what is Urvarukam? It is a pumpkin. In other words, like a big, so in other words, what do you and I want from you, Ishvara? We want Urvarukam. In other words, like a big, heavy pumpkin. When it's ripe, we can pluck it off easily. When a big, heavy pumpkin is ripe, it's easy to pluck off. In that same way, when the mind is ripe, it effortlessly is able to be released, bandhanat, from bondage. Only when the mind is ripe. And how do we ripen the mind? Through these values that we're expounding in this very chapter. How else to ripen the mind? By mastering the little bondages, because here it's talking about the bondage of birth and death. Bandhanat, that means the birth and death bondage. So how do we master the big bondage? That means immortality. How do we attain immortality? By mastering or removing or conquering the many bondages that we have throughout our life. For example, what about emotional bondages? How do we address the emotional bondage? We can use that as an insight into our unconscious mind. Therefore, whenever we have an unpleasant emotion coming up, we use it as an indicator. Aha, so something's going on in my mind that needs to be looked at. Let me attack or let me address this mini bondage. We've got relative situational bondages. Opportunity here is we can use this as a learning. Right? Every mini bondage situational is an opportunity to learn. We've got old age bondage. We can convert this into the attitude of old age is wisdom. The older one gets, the wiser one gets, hopefully, assuming that you're learning, following the program, right? A lot of us, we just kind of settle into what we've learned in the last 30, 40 years, and we say, oh, I'm wise. Now, wisdom means constant, never-ending improvement. While not losing perspective, who's being improved? The relative person. Never forget that. Not you, the absolute person. And then the question is, why is this big burden, why is this big pumpkin so effortlessly released? Because you're not approaching this through a forced approach. What is forced approach of growth? Impatience. I want results now. When I'm going to attain this or that, right? In other words, you're resorting to the real method of improvement, and that involves looking at thought by thought. Also understanding that we will yield to old ways sometimes. Is that not true? We yield to old ways? Yeah. No matter how much teaching takes place, it seems like we yield to old ways, being fine with that. You know why? Because you got lifetimes and lifetimes behind you. And suddenly in this life, we say, here's how to live in the light of the scriptures. So therefore, you cannot expect yourself to be consistent every single day, despite learning this and being really committed into it. Sometimes we will yield to old ways, but sometimes the teaching will also shine through us. That means we have to be okay with that. Finally, what's the result of this prayer and this effort? Mrityoho mukshiya ma amritat. In other words, the more real and honest your growth is about yourself, the more you're involved, not ignoring things that are popping up right now, then the more capable is the individual of holding the final reality. As we said before, it's easy to ascertain the reality once, but it's much, much harder to hold it no matter what, in and through everything. Sleep, dream, turmoil, perturbations, in and through everything. The knowledge is clear. That's the challenge. And how to come to that point? By going through and releasing these mini bondages that we are experiencing in and through. So what I'm showing you here is there's no question of skipping anything. Value 13, asaktihi.
Sakti means clinging, attachment to things. This attitude of holding fast to things underlies the notion of ownership. Asakti means the absence of the attitude of ownership, absence of the attitude that anything peculiarly belongs to me. Ownership is notional, possession is factual. Asakti is reduction of all false relationships involving claims of ownership to factual relationships. Analysis shows that no claim to ownership can survive close scrutiny. Nothing is really mine. I cannot claim exclusive permanent title to anything, to land, to knowledge, to people, to things, or even to my own body-mind unit. When I analyze anything that I think I own, I find that there is nothing to own. There is only something to possess. Take the house where I live. That I possess this house is a fact. Physically, I am present there in person and I make use of the property. But whether or not I am the owner of the house depends not upon the physical fact of my presence, but upon a consensus of notions about my relationship to the particular property.
The ownership is purely notional and is even more clearly seen in the case of flats or modern condominiums. A few years ago, a young friend told me that he had bought a new place in Mumbai, which he invited me to see. When we arrived at his house, I found myself looking at a 7-story structure. Since this young man has a relatively modest position, I was surprised. You bought this? I asked. Not at all, he laughed. I own a flat on the 3rd floor. So we went to the 3rd floor and he ushered me in saying, this is mine. This is the flat I own. This was the first time I had heard of such an arrangement, so I was still puzzled. Do you own the land? I asked. No, he said, and explained that a cooperative management society owned the land. All he owned was one rather small flat, 2 rooms and a kitchen. So I asked, what is it you own of this flat? Do you own the floor? No, my floor is the ceiling of the fellow downstairs. Do you own the ceiling? No, the ceiling is the floor for the family upstairs. How about the walls? Well, the inner walls are shared with other flats. The outer wall, of course, belongs to the whole building as part of its structural support. So, what do you own? Well, Swamiji, I own the space. You can see the nature of ownership. A claim of ownership is always connected with something over which, at the most, I can assert is a temporary possession or control.
Many others can make claims over any given body. The mother can say, I bore this body. It is flesh of my flesh. It is mine, not separate from me. No, says the father, I am the instrumental cause, nimitta karana, of this body. I was involved in its creation. Not only do I provide all the food necessary for this body to grow, but the clothes and shelter also to protect it. The society, the community has a claim to the body. Collectively, the efforts of many have made available the things necessary for this body to be nurtured and have provided a society in which it can live. A spouse can say, this body belongs to me, a partner in marriage. Where 2 halves of a single marriage unit, I too have a claim. A child born in the marriage also will assert a claim. This body has a duty to me to stay alive and perform work, so I'll be cared for when my body grows up. It is endless. The people, the creatures, the materials and substances that can claim rights to this body, the family, the employer, the state, water, space, fire, air, goats, cows, sheep, grains, grass, fruits, vegetables, earth and sun, not to mention worms, mosquitoes, bugs and bacteria. The vulture says, someday soon, that body's going to be my dinner. Oh no, says the virus, for generations it has been my home. Thus, even for my own body, I am only a managing trustee, nothing more than that. I am the indweller of this body. It is in my possession. As possessor, I can say my body, but only in terms of possession, definitely not in terms of ownership. Even the laws of the state recognise that bodies are entrusted. State law prohibits suicide, reflecting the recognition that body is a thing entrusted to possession of a person, but which the person has no right to kill. He has the right to maintain it, but not destroy it. A possessive right only to make use of it.
Thank you, Robert. Value 13. Asaktihi, absence of sense of ownership. What is asaktihi? It is knowing the difference, as the book said, between ownership and trusteeship. Before answering that question, what is ownership and trusteeship? Talk about a simple fact. Take anything like that's close to you. Possession of that object is a fact. Now, what does possession mean? If you say, I possess X, what does this mean? It means in relation to me, in relation to this person, in relation to myself, this object is somehow connected to me, or it's related to me. That's what possession means. So what is possession? In relation to myself, this object is somehow related or connected to me. I possess a house. You say that. So that means in relation to myself, my wife, my family, we are somehow connected to this object called a house, right? I possess a title in a position. In relation to this person, this title is somehow connected to this person. So that's so far a fair description of possessing. So possession is a fact. We all possess objects. We possess our clothes. We possess knowledge. We possess so many things around us. However, this fact turns into a distortion. We convert this possession into, as the book says, into I own this. I own this flat. Like I made this. I created this. Because of me, this thing is surviving. I'm its creator, sustainer. Is that a fact? No. So what have we done? We've taken a fact of possession and we have now added a new fact that is not true. We went from a fact into no fact, from possession into ownership. So we have done this total reversal about it. That means we've now an incorrect relationship towards a particular object. Now, what's the consequence of this? When we convert a possession, that means a fact, into ownership, as if I created it, as if I am sustaining it. What's the consequence of this? Then our ahamkara, we spoke about ahamkara, the I sense, gets enmeshed with this object, which we have now taken ownership of. So what does this mean? Whatever happens to the object happens to the possessor of the ahamkara. If the object gets hurt, who gets hurt? The ahamkara gets hurt. The I sense gets hurt. So what happens then? Then it's in my interest to control that object for whose sake? For my sake, because I do not know the difference between myself, the ahamkara, and that object. That object as though has become part of the person's ahamkara. Let's take an example from last week. Suppose that you and I were in a presidential position, like the former president of the USA. It's not easy to release that position, is it? Right? If we lose perspective. And we're so attached to the position. Oh, I'm the president. So what's the fact? The fact is I possess the presidency title. But where's the distortion? I own this title. And then what happens? We have problems releasing our presidential position. And then, of course, we have to create a big story about it, like we're being cheated and so on. Because there's always this justification process that follows. What's another example when a possession becomes the ahamkara? What's another example? That happens very often in businesses, family-owned businesses. Suppose one of the family members needs to relinquish their title, their position. You think it's that easy? Okay, fine, I'm going to release it. No, because the family member has been running this business for years. They're invested into it. Why do you think most business owners stay in their business for their entire life, despite making millions and millions and millions? Like, what are you going to do with all that money? In other words, now money has become the end. Why? Because I'm unable to release myself, the ahamkara, from this object called business mastery, because it's now part of me. I am a business master. Therefore, for me to survive is for the business to survive. Therefore, the family member cannot easily release or relinquish their title in the business. Happens all the time. Very common problem. One aspect that I really honor about Bill Gates, Bill Gates, the former CEO of Microsoft, running Microsoft, right? And then what happens? Him and Belinda Gates were able to relinquish their title of Microsoft, go into something completely different, right? Help children in Africa. That is a huge endeavor to relinquish one's title of such a huge, successful company. Hats off for them to that example of a couple that are able to relinquish their title and therefore move on with their lives so that they can continue their trajectory, their state of growth. Now imagine they didn't, right? And now they're still attached to Microsoft. What would have they missed out on? This huge opportunity to improve, to grow through helping children by creating vaccines for anti-malaria and this foundation that they're creating. How do we release this sense of ownership? This is where we have to know the difference between ownership and trusteeship. So what is ownership? As I just explained, I own this. It's whereby possession, the fact of possession, has transferred, has become a personal invested interest into ownership. I own this. I own this child, I own this wife, I own this spouse, I own this, etc. But what is trusteeship? Trusteeship is saying, yes, it's true. I, the individual, have a connection to this object, but this connection is only temporary. Keep this in mind. It is only temporary. There's no such thing as a permanent connection. How do they go? True love forever, or ever true love, the happy story. And then they were happily ever after, right? Happily ever after, that's it. There's no such thing as that. It's only relative to one lifetime. Next life, different partners, right? Maybe they meet up together, but it's certainly not all lifetimes. So this object is something that I do have a connection with. You certainly have a connection with your friends, with those that are close to you, definitely. But remember this, it is only temporary. And this object that we are given is endowed with certain qualities that we enjoy, but for a finite amount of time. So it is given to us. We are entrusted this object for a limited amount of time. Now, when someone entrusts you something, suppose someone gives you a child, entrusts you to take care of a child because no one else happens to be around. How do you feel? Responsible, right? Suppose they are 5 years old. Instantly, your responsibility goes up because you know that this child knows nothing. They know something because they're 5, but you're entirely now responsible because you're entrusted this child, this body, to help them grow, to help them expand into a mature human being. In that same way, Ishvara entrusts this body, which we're now using, in this case to talk, in this case to listen, so that a learning can take place. So what is trusteeship? I am endowed this object, whatever it is, I'll use the body example later, for a limited amount of time, therefore I use it responsibly. At the same time, how do we now make a distortion out of this teaching? We say something like, oh, okay, so everything is endowed, so nothing here is mine. This is a common spiritual statement. Everything is Ishvara. See, we know this. This is a fact. But suppose you say this out loud, right? Oh, okay, nothing's mine, everything's Ishvara. So I'm going to say, okay, so I'm going to show up at your house and sleep in your bed. Are you going to allow that? Absolutely not, right? So in other words, we say these spiritual statements, but we don't really mean them. Therefore, no need to say these statements despite them being true. There is a certain etiquette, a certain way, a certain manner of how to conduct oneself. And it certainly isn't in a sense of just walking to someone's house and saying, oh, I'm going to use your car, it's all mine, because it's, no, you cannot use my bed. Why not? Because you said everything's Ishvara. Well, my bed's an exception. No, Ishvara is everything. So in other words, we cannot make these statements because we don't really mean them. How do we develop this absence of ownership? What's the way to release this sense of I own this? How do we now reduce this? Recognize that everything is being endowed by Ishvara's grand order. Your family, your house, the materials are not yours. They come from earth. We didn't make the earth. The air right now, right? It's not yours. The materials are all supplied. Let's take the body, for example. I think the book talked about this, right? Who exactly owns the body? Is it your mom? Your dad? The grains, that means the food, the wind, the air, the sun, that's also contributed, the space that's holding your body. Is it the grandparents? Because grandparents gave birth to your parents, which gave birth to your body. Is it their grandparents? So we cannot find one particular person or object who absolutely owns. And at the same time, whatever object we name resolves back into the one source, Ishvara. That's why we say Ishvara is the owner of everything, because it all comes out of the one. We take this teaching into another extreme. We say, okay, so body's not mine, no problems. This is a good teaching. So I'm now just not going to care. Is this the image that we get from the Mahabharata, with Lord Krishna, who is embellishing himself with ornaments, living a rather luxurious life? Is this the image he's showing to us? Just don't care about it. He's the Lord of the universe, remember? Still embellishing his body, still enjoying through colors and cheer. Therefore, it doesn't mean just let go of the body. It's not important. The cleanliness is not important. None of it is important. Krishna shows very wisely, very clearly, that even a wise person is able to celebrate their, quote, decaying body. That's why I said this session, nothing here is about discarding, rather embracing it, seeing where it belongs without losing perspective that you are indeed embellishing a temporary body, but it doesn't stop you from embellishing, from looking beautiful, from putting makeup on, from, once in a while, just kind of, enjoying being an ordinary human being. We also have another wise person in the Mahabharata, Vyasa. He's a total recluse, right? He's in a forest. Different lifestyle. Another wise person, Vidur, is a prince. 3 different people, different personalities, all wise. Therefore, your lifestyle does not give away your spirituality. That is a wrong conclusion, because often we think, oh, let me look at your lifestyle and I can tell exactly where you are in your stage of progress. That is untrue. The Mahabharata shows us this. What happens if we forget this trusteeship? The fact that this body has been graced through your karma in this life by Ishvara. What happens if we forget this? We start to abuse the body, like overeating. What's the psychological reason behind overeating? Well, I cannot change the world, right? But I can change this person. So what do? This is just one of the reasons. So then we redirect the anger, the resentment onto this body, and therefore then we start to abuse this body. This would not be possible if that very person knew that this body has been entrusted to you, just like a little child being entrusted and saying, hey, take care of me, I'm abandoned. You have no choice. In fact, you almost, there's a fatherly, motherly quality that comes out of you that really wants to participate and honor their growth. In that same way here, if we understand that this body is entrusted to us by our father, by our mother, called Ishvara, one and the same, then we have a totally different relationship with this very body that we are carrying around, without denying it, just putting it in the right place, never losing sight of what's the nature of this body, but what's the nature of the self. And I can still, despite knowing that, adorn this body. The other consequence is self-criticism that's capable of discovering the final reality. Why criticize it? It's been endowed to you by the very intelligence that is running this entire universe right now. That very intelligence is the one because of whom this body is now listening, capable of assimilating this. We're talking about that intelligence. Therefore, why insult that intelligence through this body? It just doesn't make sense. So these are a few things to reconsider when it comes to ownership. And what's the summary? Convert one's sense of ownership into trusteeship. We are endowed, whether this body, whether our wife or house or our skills or our knowledge, for a short amount of time. Therefore, take responsibility and use it wisely, like a father or mother would do or care for their own child. Value 11, anahankaraha, healthy I sense. Value 12, anudarshanam, reflecting on the 5-fold limitations. Value 13, asaktihi, absence of ownership. One more time. Value 13, asaktihi, absence of ownership. Value 14, anabhishwangaha putra dara grahadishu.
Lord Krishna mentions a few of these possessions, son, wife, house, etc. Shankara adds the servant to this list, and you can add a few more like car, stocks, and so on. These are the things you very dearly possess and with whose well-being your happiness and sorrow are connected. That is abhishvangaha. There is so much identity with them that when they are doing well, you are happy. When they are not, you are miserable. Even when the person dies, you feel that you might as well be dead. This is abhisvangaha, excessive attachment. It is not simply affection, but an affection that smothers you and the other person because there is too much emotional dependence. In order to bring up a child or maintain an intimate relationship, you must have care and affection. These are healthy, positive expressions that help a person to grow. The problem is not affection, but emotional dependence. Arjuna is not a sannyasi, and over his shoulders, Krishna is addressing all householders here. Although there is no affection for the house, there can be great care. This excessive caring for house, car, furniture to the point of anxiety is abhisvangaha. It is a misplaced value. You need to understand how much care is appropriate and where the care ends and the attachment begins. When it causes you any kind of pain, it is attachment, not caring. First, I must see my absence of ownership. Then for some possessions, there is a natural affection because they require my care. It is here that I must be careful not to develop attachment. Love and care are fine, but not more than that. When it becomes emotional dependence, it creates a problem for me and for others. The one who is loved becomes a source of pain. It is easy to talk about these things, but in reality, we must be alert. There is a very fine line between attachment and caring, which is not easy to discern. Our reactions are the indicators in this. This is all part of vairagya.
Value 14, anabhishvangaha, absence of obsession. Putra, son, dara, wife, and graham is house. Now, graham can mean anything really, just something that resembles something close to you. So putra, dara, graham. That means absence of obsession towards those three, which represent anything that is close to us. So that means what is anabhishvangaha? Absence of attachment towards people or objects which are considered dear. Therefore, I call them beloved. So I'm going to convert this lesson into dealing with those things that are beloved to us, very close to us. There are a few unhealthy patterns that show up in a beloved relationship with putra, dara, or graham. In other words, anything that's close to us. And let's talk about these unhealthy patterns so we can identify them and make a few corrections there. The first one is whereby nurturing turns into controlling. What does it mean to be nurturing towards your beloved? Nurturing towards your beloved. Does someone want to answer this question? Yes.
Not being judgmental, but trying to be more understanding and compassionate.
Allowing them to grow, live their own life and grow in their own way.
Having no expectations of the outcome of how they grow or whatever happens in their life, but caring, being there supportive.
Sometimes you need to let them make mistakes, let them do and find out themselves.
So what does it mean to be nourishing? So you are feeling free. There's a sense of freedom to share your thoughts because you care. There's a genuine caring towards the other, towards others' well-being. But at the same time, someone said, I think Sunita said, at the same time, while there's care, we're not saying it for the sake of insisting that they change. I think also Rani was saying this. So sure, you're sharing your thoughts because there's a concern, but at the same time, it's not out of an agenda. It's out of just simply offering your side, but then still letting them understanding fully they have their own trajectory to follow. So in other words, you're having a friendly dialogue. It's for the sake of bringing light to a certain issue that they may not be aware of, right? Because we're kind of caught up in our own net and we cannot quite discern that we're inside a net. So we need someone else's help. And so we can listen to their feedback. We can say, I need some help here. Is there anything that I could be missing out? Is it something that you see about me that I haven't quite looked into? So in other words, you're openly sharing, but there's no, as Rani was saying, expectation, or someone was saying, for them to absolutely follow your advice or what you say.
Guiding them, being there when they need help, and while they are young, maybe observing them and being more present and attentive to following up what they're doing. I'm just talking about the child.
What's the controlling version of this? Controlling is insisting they must change. Therefore, what happened now? You've crossed boundaries into control. So you were nourishing, all right, but now, how does that turn into control? They have to change. They have to follow this because, hey, I am their creator. I'm involved, right? They're part of my hamkara. They must change for my sake. So now that's crossing borders into control. Now, why does this happen? When we love something, it's hard to discern between control and nurturing because we care. So therefore, out of our care, we turn into a control. We want to hold a certain status quo so that we preserve them for our sake. So this means already we're now in one way suffocating the capacity of that being to follow their own unique trajectory. But at the same time, it doesn't now mean go and release them, let them go, get their own swadharma. This is the other extreme version. In other words, you're still guiding them, as Gokul rightfully said, but still at the same time, while guiding them, allowing them the space to make their own small mistakes here and there so they can learn. So let's take the obsession example over putra, over son. That means son or daughter. Suppose the parent tries to constantly lecture the son. I'm going to use the son here. It can also mean daughter. Constantly lecture. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with lecturing while they're young. But when does it cross border into control? As the child starts to grow up, the parent, being used to lecturing, carries that over into their adulthood. Therefore, now the parent has made a mistake. They're now transferred nurturing into controlling. And is this fair to the child? No. Why? Because you're not letting the child face challenges. That's the ultimate learning, to go through the challenges through one's own experiences. Right? They need to find out for themselves. Again, nothing wrong lecturing because the child doesn't know. As I said last week, we're all born ignorant about the world and the self. Nothing wrong doing it at the beginning. But then slowly, you need to, as a parent, need to become selectively, you need to selectively give them exposure to life. Selectively. What does this mean? I think as Gokul was saying, this means little by little, you need to start relinquishing this sense of lecturing. I need to lecture you one more time. Something happened, let me lecture you. Little by little, the parent needs to start relinquishing this capacity because the child is now ready to start facing more challenges for their own growth. Now, the next question is, how do you know that the child is ready to be exposed more to life, that they actually are ready to be more independent, more exposed to life?
When they reckon they know more than you do. I always used to tell my children, go and get a job now while you still know everything.
Perhaps they start voicing their own opinion a little bit about how they perceive things.
Good. In other words, they start to ask questions. Why? How? Where? This is when the mind starts to think. In other words, it's starting to take the already existing lectures, which you have provided as while they were young. They had taken those lectures in the light of their experience, now having grown up a little bit. And now they're starting to connect the two and they're starting to identify a few loopholes. Why is it this way, right? This is not clear. So therefore, now the parent has an indication that the child is ready for selective exposure. Therefore, you need to relinquish a certain level of lecturing because this is, they're ready, more and more ready. Suppose the parent makes a mistake and they continue lecturing. What is the reason for this? Suppose you want your son to change, be like us, constantly lecturing, 15 lecturing, 16 lecturing, 18 lecturing. You're 30 years old, they're still lecturing you.
Insecurity.
Okay, go back to the ahamkara. What is mine?
Losing
they think they own them.
Yeah, in other words, since I am unwilling to make a change in myself, doesn't matter. The child's mine. So if they make a change, who's making a change? I am. Therefore, I push my son, go achieve, go out there, go out there, go out there. Let's go the other way. Stay the way that you are. Don't change. What does that reveal about the parent? The parent doesn't want to change. Therefore, they superimpose that, since the child's mine, onto the son. Therefore, parent-child relationship gives a lot about the parent also. So that was the first distortion in a beloved relationship. Nurturing has crossed the border into control. The second is over-dependence. Over-dependence. This is whereby I forgot to stand on my own 2 feet. I lost myself in you. I do not know the difference between myself and you. Like almost, it looks romantic on the outside, right? Oh, they're so inseparable. Inseparable. But what does this mean? If you look behind it, it's actually 2 people through the course of their endeavor together, at some point forgot to stand on their own 2 feet. Lost identity. In other words, I am partially functional without you. If you die, I'm dead. My life has lost meaning. Another common thing. So this is whereby the person literally has no separation between themselves and the other beloved. They're like almost one. Wherever I go, you go with me, always holding hands together, literally inseparable. But this is, again, like two children depending upon each other. But what's the truth? They're adults. Adult has the capacity to think independently of the other. That's a fact. But this fact has been forgotten. Owning to, distortion number 2, over dependence. They are part of my ahamkara is part of theirs. So what happens in this case is when one of them dies, very soon the other follows. Or if they don't follow very soon, then their life almost loses meaning. So therefore, let's not make this mistake, completely losing ourselves in our beloved. Distortion number 3, artificial dispassion. This is when one of the beloveds go into spirituality, and now they use Vedanta as a self-protection mechanism, right? They're like, okay, so this viraga is very good teaching. I kind of like it. So I'm just going to kind of turn myself into an emotional stone. Right? Nothing affects me anymore. Whatever drama goes in the house, it doesn't affect me. I am beyond all of this. You know, this is all just wife is temporary, children are temporary, right? In other words, this is called artificial dispassion. Another distortion that happens even within spirituality. Attitudes within a beloved relationship. Some of the attitudes, there's many of them, right? But some principles of how to conduct within a beloved relationship with someone that's very close to us. The first is, we need to know the difference between submissiveness and forgiveness. There's another fine line that we forget. So what is submissiveness? Submissiveness means I'm just going to let it go. Something unpleasant happens, something that is not completely coherent with what you stand for, and you just let it go for the sake of not rocking the boat, for the sake of not wishing to have confrontation going on. Therefore, what do? We just kind of let it go, let it go. And we mistake this letting go with forgiveness. This letting go, like Yudhishthira kind of letting go, is called submissiveness. Not wanting to bring up the issue for the sake of preserving the status quo of the relationship. This is called submissiveness. It happens on both sides. I'm going to let it go. It's okay. You know, this has kind of been going on for 5 years. Why address it now? Right? And then it just keeps on getting more and more. We allow ourselves more opportunity, more chance to be more submissive. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is an active process. It is whereby, sure, a mistake has been made on either side. Something unpleasant has occurred. But then what do? We get actively involved. We actively engage ourselves in that particular situation. We talk. What happened? Why has this occurred? Have you reflected upon this? How will you be different? You know, what have you learned from this? What can we now learn from this totality of this situation? In other words, you're actively understanding where they are coming from. And when they explain to you, okay, you know, this is my mistake. I should have thought about it. I just kind of lost into my little impulsiveness there. Remember the impulsive thinking earlier on. And then you're really understanding where they're coming from. On the basis of that understanding, we say, okay, so I heard you. So not only have you apologized, but also you have shown how next time this will be different. So on the basis of that information, of that reassurance, I can now gladly forgive you. So see the difference? Submissiveness is putting things silently, not willing to engage oneself with the other party, just kind of letting it go. Forgiveness is an active, dynamic process that involves asking, questioning, understanding where the other person came from. When you understand, then you're able to go, okay, so I have no more resentment towards you because I have now understood where you were coming from. Whereas submissiveness, what does that do? Creates resentment, builds through the years. And one day it starts to show through behaviors in a form of passive aggressive, for example, in a form of kind of embarrassing the other in public, for example. All right, so it shows in all forms of complications throughout the time of being together. So that was the difference between submissiveness and forgiveness. Also, we have to understand the purpose of a relationship, at least in the light of the scriptures. The relationship is not the end with anyone, whether with the beloved or the most beloved. It is not the end. It is a means to the end, because we go through many lifetimes. We meet one individual. We love them gladly, hopefully. However, get not lost into the individual, because relationship itself was never meant to be the end. It was only a means to something much bigger than the relationship. Therefore, it is neither useless nor is it the highest aim in life. Because sometimes we go into another extreme. Oh, okay, useless. So just stay single all your life, right? And then we go, okay, so you're a sannyasi, okay. And then the sannyasi kind of justifies, okay, I don't want any of this, it's all a waste of time. But if you look into their minds, their psychology, there's a deeper reason. So one has to be completely honest where they stand right now. What is this decision? Is it coming out of honesty or out of creating an excuse to justify their lack of willing to participate in life? What can a beloved show us? They can show us a few things, like our limitations. Can you see your own limitations? No, hard to see, right? But they can, because we're caught in our own net, as I said earlier. But a beloved, being out of our net, they can show us. Now we have a choice. They can point out our own limitations, our own blind spots, and we can either consider it. We can ask the question, tell me more in that manner, explain, I haven't thought about it, or we can just dismiss it because we're so, kind of established into our quote adulthood. So there's always that choice. If you do consider those limitations, then you are now turning a relationship into what it was actually meant for, a means to an end. That means looking at one's own limitations, which are obstructions to seeing the objective Vyavaharika world, which is required to be appreciated for the sake of holding the permanent vision as self. So there's always a connection between there. What else can a beloved help us? They can teach us accommodation. What is accommodation? The capacity to accept the other person's point of view without the need for them to specifically agree towards your view. In other words, you're simply accommodating, seeing this is a human being who has concluded a certain fact of life. Now, how accommodative am I really towards them? Can I actually appreciate what they have discovered for themselves? Or do I have a need to say, no, let me correct you in the light of Advaita Vedanta? That is not accommodation. See, even if you do know that Vedanta may be more in touch with reality and what they're saying is kind of yet to be improved in certain ways, it doesn't matter. You can simply share your opinion, but do not insist them or expect them to, as Rani was saying earlier, to change according to what you're saying. Then it's fine. But to insist them to change, then we have lost touch about what is the means of a relationship, means to an end. And what is the means in this case? To learn a sense of accommodation, kshantihi. It can also show us compassion. Question, what's the difference between compassion and empathy? Empathy is simply having a sensitive mind, sensitive enough, capable of capturing the feelings of another human being, capturing their experience. I see you. I see where you're at. Not just one of those, negotiation. I understand where you're coming from. That's not understanding at all. That's just for the sake of negotiation. But really feeling, where's the person at right now? Like seeing your own child. You literally see them. But now you extend that vision onto everything in the entire world. Strangers also. Owning to a clear mind. So the clearer the mind is, the more this natural inherent quality of empathy starts to be realized, starts to flourish. That's why we say a wise person has a clear mind. They're capable of seeing the world as though it's transparent. Why? Because their mind is clear. They're not obstructing the world or what's going on, of what is, into their own interpretation of what it is. They're just simply feeling into what's going on right now. Martin?
I was just thinking, in a nutshell, could you say that empathy is a response of an emotion, whereas compassion is a response from the intellect?
Okay, so, okay, good, thank you. So Empathy, we're all clear now. Empathy is being sensitive about what is going on right now. What is compassion? Acting on the basis of that sensitivity. It's one thing to have empathy towards you, but something else to have compassion. Compassion is acting out empathy. Therefore, compassion is an active process. As someone was saying, it's out. Whereas empathy is internal. It is simply simply an indicator of a sophisticated, mature, clean mind. But you have to follow that up. How do you do that? That following up is compassion. Compassion versus empathy. Compassion is empathy in action. What else can a relationship show us? How to gently assert our boundaries. There's a difference between impolitely setting boundaries and gently asserting one's boundaries. In other words, stating where are you willing to no longer get involved with, because that means you know your limits, you know your standards, and those standards are gently being assertively vocalized to your environment. Because as we said earlier, who is the center of one's life? Self. Therefore, if we start to avoid this centerhood in the name of just letting things come to us without setting boundaries, then we start to build resentment. And why should we set boundaries? For the sake of a healthy relationship. Because if we don't set boundaries, then those see the person that has no limits, they just keep on asking more and more and more. It is up to you to say stop, no. Therefore, the other person has no choice. They're just going to say, okay, since you agreed last time, so I'm just going to ask you for more this time, right? Now, how do you know you've crossed the limits? If you set your boundaries in a insensitive way, that means not making use of empathy, then the other will get perhaps a little bit kind of disturbed, kind of like taken back by it. So there's always an art of negotiation, art of bringing something forward. Now, of course, there's no rules to this, but it's really dynamic within all relationships. That was attitude within a beloved relationship, which I will come back to in even more detail to address the difference between love and control. For now, let's bring the attitude towards a colleague, someone that you work with, someone that's close to you, someone that you just find yourself around. Suppose that you don't like someone for whatever reason. Suppose that you just don't kind of vibe or get along with someone for whatever reason in a workplace or anything. But we find ourselves around them. I know I brought this last time in some other session. How do we deal with this? Before answering, I want to ask, what does dealing with a colleague have to do with absence of obsession? Everything. Because if you don't manage your mind and it keeps on being obsessed over a disliked person, how is that going to play out? Oh, it's going to play out unpleasant because we keep on being obsessed over a person that we just do not get along with. Therefore, it has everything to do with absence of obsession. In other words, we put a person that we dislike into our minds as though we are obsessed about them. That's the irony. We're not obsessed, but we are obsessed about them. So the question now is, how do we manage this particular situation? First, check if you have resentment towards them. Now, how do you know that we are carrying resentment towards them? The answer is you will have a need. There is a need to bring it out to someone. There's a need to talk about it, sometimes over and over again. Because think about it this way. Out of all of the possibilities, this one possibility, this one star in our mind was shining bright enough that we had a need to pick that star out and therefore voice it out. Therefore, whatever we have a need to speak about is likely something that is currently the loudest star in our mind. You don't bring those things that are resolved in a conversation, do you? That are completely resolved, that you're completely at peace with. We never bring those things up. We only bring those things up that are loud in our minds, and therefore we have a need to share them. So that is one indicator that we may be potentially holding resentment towards someone. How do you know? You have a need to bring up that person and say, there's this person that I kind of don't like. Careful. It could be an indicator that you haven't completely looked into this person properly to resolve this loud star. So now the question is, how do you resolve this? You need to get specific, as I was saying in the last session. What specifically do I disagree about this person? If we don't do this, you know what the mind does? What it loves to do, generalize. Therefore, the entire person in our mind becomes a disagreeable entity. Everything about them we now disagree with. But in reality, we only disagree about one specific or two specific things. Therefore, if there is some indication of resentment towards someone, first step, get specific. What specifically is it that I am disagreeing with? Otherwise, the mind will start to coloring the entire person as a disagreeable entity. That's the first option. Check if there's resentment. Second is do not engage at all. If you choose not to engage with them at all, don't do it by then following up by saying, because he or she is like this or that. Because then you're now reinforcing them in your mind. Rather, make it about you. Make it personal. Because I do not feel comfortable around them. Turn it into a first person pronoun I. I don't feel comfortable. You don't have to now explain further than that. And then resolve it within yourself. The moment we go outside because he or she is like this, because they said this, because they did this, we're not resolving that very cause within ourselves. Therefore, we're not addressing the issue. We're not using the opportunity to look into ourselves, into something that is bothering us, because that's going to reoccur in the future in a different circumstance. The third option is engage with them. However, do it within the scope of boundaries. Suppose that one has some kind of a tension around their parents. Suppose they were neglected by their mother or father. And in old age, their mom and dad needs care. And you're the only one that can't care for them. You're just put in a spot whereby you need to now care for them. However, the person is now carrying resentment. Suppose it's your mom. Now, two emotions are possible in this case. One is resentment towards the mom because you haven't resolved it earlier. Two is guilt if I don't care for her, right? So either resentment, so you go in and you have resentment and you care with resentment. Or two, I say, it's wrong not to care because it's immoral. So I'm going to care, but, and I feel guilt if I don't care. So either way, the person is in trouble because now they're carrying this person with resentment and they're going to now care for their parents. So my question is, how do you deal with this? I was actually sitting with my friend on a bench and he was telling me he went to Sydney for 1 year to take care of his dying parents. And he came back a year later and he said, no, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I don't agree with them. There's too much tension. If you find yourself in a situation, then you need to say, okay, since I'm the only one that can take care of them, I choose to care for her or him. However, make sure, agree upon yourself that you will not bring up the parts that you are resentful towards because you're caring for your mom, your dad. So you say to yourself, I choose to care for her or him, but I will not bring up this issue because my duty is to care. Because if you do bring up resentment, what happens? Then your mom or dad doesn't feel cared for. Even though you're physically caring for him or her, they can pick up your resentment through your behavior. Therefore, mentally, they don't feel cared for, but physically, they're being cared for. Therefore, they're not actually being cared for at all. So you agree, I will care, but I am not going to allow my grudges, my resentment that I'm holding towards them to get the better of me because this duty specifically is for caring. Or you make a different plan. You say, no, I choose not to because this is too much for me, but I can make an arrangement for some other kind of care plan to take place. Either way, you need to make a firm decision and prepare yourself so we're not taking anger into the situation. So therefore, this is an example how to engage, but within the scope of boundaries. We are preparing ourselves before we go in because once you're in, it's too late. We're already caught up. We're caught up in our emotions, caught up with them. They're in front of us. It's too late. Therefore, before it happens, you prepare yourself mentally, and then you go in. Next week, I will talk about, again, I will ask the question, what is absence of obsession? To answer that, we need to look at the difference between control and love. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, Ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.